I only stopped by to return the wool scarf she had left behind. However, the grey sedan parked against the curb with its engine running felt like a sentry. Through the cracked apartment door, I heard my son-in-law whisper, "You are so tight." My blood ran cold, but not from jealousy. It was the sudden, terrifying realization that I had just walked into a script written specifically to bury me alive. My name is Marjorie Whitlock, though most people who know the sharper edges of my personality simply call me Mara. At 58 years old, I had convinced myself that my days of hunting for rot underneath floorboards were over. I was supposed to be retired. Just a mother dropping off a Tupperware container of lasagna and a cashmere scarf. My daughter, Kelsey, had left at my place the Sunday prior. The drive to the South Lark district of Harbour Glen was routine. The traffic was light, and the sky was a flat, indifferent grey. However, the moment I turned onto Kelsey's street, the quiet rhythm of my afternoon stuttered. A grey sedan was idling in the loading zone directly in front of my daughter's apartment building. It was a generic model, the kind you buy when you want to disappear in a sea of traffic, but the engine was humming with a low, aggressive vibration. The windows were tinted darker than the legal limits usually allowed in this city. My stomach tightened. It was a reflex honed from 30 years in compliance and internal investigations. That car was not waiting for a passenger. It was waiting for a signal. I walked past it, gripping the scarf and the food container a little tighter, feeling the invisible weight of eyes behind that dark glass. I took the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled of lemon polish and old carpet, a scent that usually comforted me, but today it made the air feel thin. When I reached apartment 3B, I stopped dead. The door was not fully latched. A sliver of darkness, no wider than a finger, separated the wood from the frame. I reached out to knock, assuming Kelsey had just been careless, but a sound from inside froze my hand in mid-air. It was laughter, not the open, joyous kind that fills a room. It was stifled, breathless, and secretive. Then came the voice. It was Evan Calder, my son-in-law. Even through the crack in the door, I could hear the wet, heavy intimacy in his tone, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You're so tight." The words hit me like a physical blow. It was crude. It was vulgar. It was the sound of a man who thought he owned the room and everyone in it. My first instinct was to kick the door open and scream his name. That would have been the mother in me reacting, the protective parent ready to tear down the world for her child. But Mara, the investigator, took over in a split second. I did not move. I did not breathe. If I barged in there, I would just be noise. I needed to be a camera. I stepped to the side, pressing my back against the cool plaster of the corridor wall to remain out of the line of sight. Directly opposite the door hung a framed print of a generic seascape. The glass was cheap and highly reflective. I angled my head, squinting at the distorted image bouncing off the surface. I saw Evan. He was standing by the kitchen island, his back mostly to me. He was not alone. A woman with hair the colour of bleached straw was leaning against the counter, her posture relaxed, too comfortable for a guest. But it was not their physical proximity that made my pulse hammer in my ears. It was what lay on the table between them. It was a thick, manila envelope stamped with a heavy red seal. It looked official. It looked legal. It looked like a weapon. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out slowly, shielding the screen light with my palm. It was a notification from the video doorbell application. Kelsey had added me to the system 2 years ago when she went on vacation and had never revoked my access. I tapped the alert, and the live feed loaded in silence. The view was from the front door looking out, but the wide-angle lens caught the street below. The grey sedan I had passed earlier had shifted position. It was now angled so its passenger window was facing the building entrance, and I could clearly see the glint of a camera lens pointed upward. They were filming the door. The realization washed over me with the cold clarity of ice water. The unlocked door was not a mistake. It was an invitation. The loud whisper was a lure. The car outside was the witness. If I barged in there screaming about infidelity, I would look hysterical. I would look unstable. I would look exactly like the kind of person who needed to be managed. I checked the time. It was 4:12 in the afternoon. I lowered my hand, turned around, and walked back to the stairwell on the balls of my feet. I did not drop the lasagna. I did not leave the scarf. I took everything with me, descending the stairs in silence, carrying a realization far colder than the fear of betrayal. My son-in-law was not just cheating on my daughter. He was building a cage, and he was waiting for me to step inside it. I drove away from the building with the kind of mechanical precision that had defined my professional life before I was a widow or a grandmother in waiting. I was the head of compliance at the Northbridge Civic Analytics Bureau. My job was to look at messy, chaotic systems and find the single thread of dishonesty that held them together. I was good at it. I was so good at it that I burned out, my mind eventually refusing to process another redacted spreadsheet or another politely phrased lie. I retired early, telling everyone I wanted to focus on my garden. But the truth was, I just wanted the noise to stop. David died 6 years ago. When he passed, the silence in our colonial home in Meadow Ridge became heavy, like a physical weight pressing against the windows. It was too much house for one person. I sold it 3 years ago. I told myself I was downsizing to unburden my life, to be lighter and more mobile for Kelsey. I wanted to be the mother who was there when she finished a double shift, not the reclusive widow haunting a 4-bedroom mausoleum in the suburbs. Kelsey is a nurse. She has the kind of heart that breaks for strangers. She assumes the best in everyone because her profession demands that she see the humanity in people before she sees their faults. It is a beautiful trait, but it makes her blind. It made her blind to Evan. Evan Calder walked into her life wearing Italian loafers and speaking a language of aggressive optimism. He called himself an entrepreneur. He talked about disrupting markets and leveraging assets. When I sold the Meadow Ridge house, I had a substantial amount of cash sitting in my account. That was when Evan sat me down at a steakhouse, ordered a bottle of wine that cost $300, and pitched me. He had a vision for a real estate technology platform. Kelsey wanted the apartment in South Lark. They needed capital. I remembered the moment I reached for my checkbook. I had looked at Evan and asked about the terms. We should draw up a promissory note. I had said, just for the records. Evan had smiled. That tight, practiced smile that never crinkled the corners of his eyes. Mara, he said. He always called me Mara, never Mom, never Mrs. Whitlock. It was a barrier, a way of keeping me as a peer he could negotiate with, rather than an elder he had to respect. Come on. We are all on the same team here. Family doesn't need contracts. I had hesitated. My training screamed that family was exactly who needed contracts, because blood makes betrayal harder to prosecute. But I looked at Kelsey. She was beaming, her hand resting on his forearm, looking so desperate for me to approve of him, for us to be a normal, happy unit. I did not want to be the bitter old woman clutching her purse strings. So I wrote the check. I transferred the funds for the apartment. I let the paperwork slide. That was the first mistake. Over the last 6 months, the dynamic had shifted. Kelsey stopped calling as often. She cancelled our Sunday brunches, claiming exhaustion or vague plans with Evan. She mentioned once, in a voice that sounded rehearsed, that Evan was looking into optimizing our tax exposure and consolidating family assets into a trust. I had bit my tongue. I did not want to add to her stress. Meanwhile, Evan was loud online. He posted photos of weekend trips to Napa, a new diving watch, dinners where the portions were tiny and the plates were square. He was spending money that a startup founder should not have had. I stayed in my small apartment, watching from a distance, thinking I was giving them space to build their marriage. As I merged onto the highway, heading back to my empty living room, the pieces clicked together with a sickening finality. Evan did not see a former investigator who had spent 30 years hunting fraud. He saw a lonely woman who had given up her leverage for a hug. He thought my silence over the last few months was a sign of cognitive decline or submissiveness. He thought I was weak. He had absolutely no idea that he had just woken up the part of me I thought I had buried along with my career. I returned to my apartment and immediately locked the deadbolt. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing with the cold, rhythmic logic of an investigation. I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my desk, waking up my laptop. The first thing I did was pull up the activity log for the video doorbell account. I had seen the grey sedan today, but my gut told me this was not a random occurrence. I filtered the footage history. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the pattern. The grey sedan had been parked in that same loading zone 3 times in the last 2 weeks. I checked the timestamps. Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, last Friday at 10 in the morning, and today. I cross-referenced these times with my own digital calendar. Each appearance of the car coincided almost perfectly with the windows of time I had told Kelsey I might drop by. It was too precise to be a coincidence. Someone knew my schedule, and they were positioning themselves to watch me arrive. I sat back, staring at the screen. The image of the envelope on Kelsey's kitchen island burned in my memory. A standard tax document or a real estate contract comes in a plain envelope, maybe with a window for the address. But a thick envelope with a red seal usually signifies something else entirely. In my years at the Bureau, I saw that kind of packaging for high-level compliance orders, deeds, or court petitions. My heart hammered against my ribs as the words formed in my mind: power of attorney, guardianship. I grabbed my phone and dialed Kelsey. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to gauge how deep she was in this. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Mum, did you forget something else?" Her voice sounded thin, strained. "No, honey," I said, keeping my tone light and breezy. "I just wanted to make sure you got the lasagna. I didn't see you when I dropped it off." "Oh, yeah. Thanks. I was in the shower." She lied. I knew she had been in the kitchen. I had heard her laughing. "Is Evan home?" I asked. "I thought I saw his car." There was a pause, a hesitation that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "No," she said. "He's at a client meeting downtown. It's just me." "Okay. Get some rest." "Sweetie." I hung up and immediately opened my messaging app. I typed a text to Evan. "Are you at the apartment? I need to ask you about that tax form you mentioned last month." The reply bubble appeared instantly. "At the office." "Mara, Swamped. Let's talk next week. He replied within 10 seconds. If he were truly swamped at the office, he would not be texting his mother-in-law instantly. He was in that apartment, likely watching my text come in while standing right next to the woman with the blonde hair. I was about to close the laptop when a new email notification slid into the corner of my screen. The subject line made the air leave my lungs. Appointment, confirmation, Dr. Aris Thorne. Cognitive and memory assessment. I clicked it, my fingers suddenly feeling numb. The email was from a neurology clinic on the north side of town. It confirmed an appointment for Marjorie Whitlock for next Thursday at 9 in the morning. I had not booked this. I had never even heard of Dr. Thorne. I scrolled down to the bottom of the confirmation. Patient contact. Guardian, Evan Calder. The room seemed to tilt. They were not just trying to steal my money. They were building a case to steal my mind. A cognitive assessment is the first step in declaring someone incompetent. If they could get a doctor to sign off that I was showing signs of dementia or confusion, they could file for emergency guardianship. That was the tight story Evan was whispering about. They were scripting my senility. I stared at the name on the screen. Evan Calder. He had booked an appointment to test my brain function without even telling me, likely planning to drive me there under the guise of a checkup or a lunch date. I felt a surge of nausea, but I forced it down. Panic is useless. Panic makes you sloppy. I took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and stood up. If they wanted a confused, helpless old woman, I would not give them a fight. Not yet. I would give them exactly what they wanted to see, right up until the moment the trap snapped shut on their fingers. I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Evan's lie. Oh, that is a shame. I feel so scattered lately. I keep forgetting where I put things. We can talk when you are free. I hit send. Let him think the script was working. I did not cry. Crying swells the eyes and obscures the vision, and I needed to see everything with absolute clarity. I sat at my desk, the wood cool under my forearms, and engaged the part of my brain that used to dismantle corporate fraud schemes. This was no longer a family dispute. It was an extraction operation, and I was the target. I picked up my phone and dialed Lena Hartwell. Lena was a shark I had befriended during my time in compliance. A woman who treated the law less like a Bible and more like an instruction manual for a weapon. She answered on the second ring. "Mara," she said, her voice raspy with cigarette smoke. "It has been a while. Please tell me you are not calling to ask for a casserole recipe. I need a clarification on statutes," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "In Pennsylvania. How strict is the one-party consent law regarding audio recording in a private residence where the expectation of privacy is disputed?" There was a pause, the sound of a lighter flicking, and then an exhale. "That is a very specific question. Mara, as long as you are a participant in the conversation, you can record it without the other party knowing. Who are you planning to tape?" "I will tell you when I have the tape," I said. "Thank you." "Lena." I hung up and turned back to my laptop. Step 1 was the money. I logged into my banking portal and pulled the archives from 3 years ago. I found the transaction where I had transferred $75,000 to what I thought was a joint account for Kelsey and Evan to close on their apartment. I clicked on the transaction details, expanding the routing information. The beneficiary was not Calder, Evan and Kelsey. It was an entity called Calder Meridian Holdings, LLC. I opened a new tab and accessed the state's business registry database. It cost me $20 to pull the articles of incorporation. but it was worth every penny. Calder Meridian Holdings had been formed 2 weeks before I wrote that check. The registered agent was not Evan. It was Trent Calder, Evan's younger brother. The business address was a virtual mailbox at a shipping centre in a strip mall 3 towns over. I took a screenshot, printed it, and taped it to the wall above my desk. Then I printed the bank transfer receipt and taped it next to the LLC document. A timeline began to take shape on my wall. Evidence is useless if it does not tell a story. And this story was screaming that my generous family loan had been siphoned off into a shell company controlled by my son-in-law's brother. I went back to the video doorbell application. I navigated to the user settings, looking for the access logs. I scrolled past my name and Kelsey's name. There, at the bottom, added just last Tuesday, was a new administrator account. The email address was partially redacted, but it started with Trent, C. Kelsey had never mentioned giving Trent access to see who came to her front door. They were monitoring my visits. I grabbed my keys and drove back to Kelsey's building. It was dark now. I parked a block away and walked to the residence parking lot, keeping my head down. The grey sedan was still there, tucked into a visitor spot in the shadows. I walked past it quickly, reciting the license plate number in my head until I was safely back in my own car. I texted the number to a contact I had at a local auto repair chain, a man who owed me a favour for keeping his shop off a fraud list years ago. Need a service history check on this plate. Internal database only. Who pays the bills? 10 minutes later. My phone pinged. The car was fleet registered to a company called Redline Field Services, a private investigation firm. I knew of them. They were expensive and aggressive. But the text message had a second image attached a screenshot of the billing profile associated with the vehicle's maintenance account. Card on file is corporate. My contact had typed. I zoomed in on the billing address for the credit card that paid for the surveillance car's oil changes and tyres. It was not Evan's startup. It was not Trent's shell company, Northbridge Civic Analytics Bureau. The words sat on my screen, glowing neon white in the dark car. My old employer. The agency where I had spent 3 decades enforcing rules was paying for a private investigator to watch my daughter's apartment. My hands went cold on the steering wheel. This was not just about Evan stealing my retirement money. Someone at Northbridge was involved. They were trying to build a case that I was mentally compromised, likely to discredit something I knew or something I had done before I retired. Evan was not just a greedy husband. He was an asset in a much larger game to silence me. I started the engine, my heart beating with a slow, dangerous rhythm. They wanted to designate me a risk. I decided right then that I would become the biggest risk they had ever encountered. I met Lena at a small, dimly lit coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place where lawyers go to hide from their clients. The air smelled of burnt espresso and rain. Lena did not sugarcoat anything. She leaned over the scratched wooden table, her voice low. If they are preparing a guardianship petition, Mara, they need more than just a desire to control your assets. They need to manufacture a crisis. They need evidence that you are a danger to yourself or others. If they can't find that evidence, they will create it. I nodded, stirring my black coffee. That explains the surprise neurology appointment. Exactly, Lena said. They get a doctor to note confusion or paranoia on your chart. Then, when you inevitably get angry or emotional about them stealing your money, they point to that anger as a symptom of the decline. It is a playbook, and they are running it page by page. I left Lena with a list of tasks. My first stop was the management office of Kelsey's apartment building. The manager was a nervous man who clearly did not want to get involved in a domestic dispute, but I had Lena draft a letter on her firm's letterhead beforehand. It demanded access to the key fob entry logs for my daughter's unit based on my status as a financial guarantor on the lease, a detail Evan had conveniently forgotten when he accepted my money 3 years ago. The manager hesitated, wiped his forehead, and then printed the list. The logs confirmed that while Kelsey was at the hospital working night shifts, Evan's fob was scanning in guests at all hours. I needed a human witness to corroborate the digital data. I went back to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door of apartment 3A. Paige, a single mother with a toddler on her hip and tired eyes, opened the door. We had spoken a few times in the hallway, mostly about the weather. "I'm sorry to bother you, Paige," I said, "but have you noticed anyone unusual coming to Kelsey's place lately?" Paige shifted the baby to her other hip and lowered her voice. I didn't want to say anything. "Mara, I know Kelsey works hard, but yeah, when she works the overnight shift, Evan brings a woman here, tall, blonde hair, very corporate looking." I felt a sting of sympathy for my daughter, but I pushed through it. "Did you ever hear them say anything once?" Paige said, "About a week ago, they were in the hallway. He was whispering to her, really intense. He said, 'Keep it tight, don't mention the papers yet.' It sounded weird, like they were planning a heist, not an affair. Keep it tight." The phrase echoed in my head, but its meaning was shifting. I needed to know who the blonde woman was. I hired Omar Red, a private investigator Lena had recommended. Omar was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, a former court security officer who had lost his job for refusing to physically remove an evicted grandmother. He met me in his car, took the license plate number of the grey sedan and the description Paige had provided, and told me to give him 24 hours. He called me in 6. "Her name is Brianna Sloan," Omar said, his voice crackling over the phone. "She isn't just a girlfriend. Mara, she is an asset protection consultant. She used to work for a heavy-handed estate planning firm, but she lost her license for unethical practices. She specializes in distressed family transitions." "What does that mean in plain English?" I asked. "It means she helps greedy relatives transfer deeds and power of attorney before the original owner is even dead," Omar said, the disgust evident in his tone. "She drafts the paperwork, coaches the family on how to stage an intervention, and finds doctors who are willing to sign capacity evaluations. She sells a package deal for stealing a life." I sat in my car, staring at the rain streaking the windshield. The pieces slammed together with a terrifying logic. When I heard Evan whisper, "You're so tight," through the door, I had assumed it was a crude sexual remark. I was wrong. He wasn't talking about her body. He was talking about the plan. A tight story, a tight file, a tight timeline. They were not just having an affair. They were conducting a business meeting. Brianna Sloan was the architect of my destruction, and Evan was her eager client. They were ensuring that every document, every doctor's visit, and every staged incident was airtight, so that when they finally dropped the net on me, there would be no holes for me to slip through. The realization did not make me feel weak. It made me feel dangerous. They thought they were writing a tragedy about a senile old woman, but they had just introduced a villain into their own story. I sat at my laptop and composed an email to the neurology clinic with the deliberate hesitation of someone losing their grip. I typed, "I am confirming the appointment for next Thursday. I am a bit nervous about the tests." Will there be memory games? I have been feeling so scattered lately. I hit send. It was the perfect bait. It confirmed I was compliant, anxious, and exactly the kind of vulnerable old woman who needed a guardian. Next, I called Kelsey. I told her I wanted to see her before the appointment, just to calm my nerves. I suggested a walk in the park near the hospital. She agreed, her voice thick with guilt. But then I heard a muffled exchange in the background. "Evan wants to come too," she said, her tone shifting to something more guarded. "He drives me everywhere these days." "That is fine," I said, forcing a brightness into my voice that I did not feel. The more the merrier. I needed him there. I needed him to think he was steering the ship right up until it hit the rocks. I dressed in a beige cardigan that washed out my complexion and skipped my usual eyeliner to look more tired. In my purse, alongside a packet of tissues, was a silver ballpoint pen Lena had given me. It was a high-fidelity recording device legal in our state as long as I was a party to the conversation. I clicked the top button as I exited my car at the park entrance. The recording had begun. They were waiting on a bench near the duck pond. Evan looked impeccable in a navy blazer, while Kelsey looked exhausted. Her eyes rimmed with red. I sat between them, letting my shoulders slump. "I brought some paperwork." "Mara," Evan said, pulling a document from a leather folder. He didn't waste time. "Since you are going to see Dr. Thorne next week, we thought it would be best to get the medical power of attorney signed, just in case you have a bad day and can't make decisions." Kelsey reached out and squeezed my hand. "It's just for safety, Mum. We want to make sure you get the best care if anything happens." Tears welled in her eyes. She truly believed this was an act of love. She had no idea she was reading lines from a script Brianna Sloane had written. I took the document. It was dense. I put on my reading glasses and moved my finger across the page with agonizing slowness. I muttered the words under my breath, stopping at random clauses. "Does this say full authority?" I asked. Squinting. Evan tapped his foot. "It's standard language. Mara. It just lets us talk to the doctors." "And this date here," I said, pointing to a blank line. "Do I put today or next week today?" Evan said, his voice tightening. "Just sign it at the bottom. We need to get this file to keep the timeline tight." He caught himself, laughing a short, dry laugh. To keep everything organized? I froze. There was that word again. Tight. It was his verbal tick when he was focusing on the plan. I lowered the paper and looked at my daughter. "Kelsey, honey, thank you for finding Dr. Thorne. I know it must have taken a long time to get an appointment so quickly." Kelsey blinked, a tear rolling down her cheek. "What, I didn't find him?" "Evan told me you booked it. He said you told him you were worried about your memory and asked for help." The air between us snapped. Kelsey turned to look at Evan, her expression shifting from sadness to confusion. "You said Mom asked for this. You said she called you crying." Evan stiffened. "She forgets things. Kels, that is the whole point. She probably doesn't remember asking me. I remember perfectly well that I did not ask for a cognitive assessment." I said softly. I leaned in close to Kelsey, ignoring Evan completely. I whispered, loud enough for the pen in my pocket, but low enough to feel intimate. "You trust him, Kelsey. I know you do. But do you trust that your signature on this document won't be used for something else later? Like it was on the house papers. It was a gamble. But I saw the colour drain from Kelsey's face. She pulled her hand away from the document. I think we should wait. Kelsey stammered, pulling back. Let's wait until after the doctor sees her. Evan's face changed. The mask of the concerned son-in-law evaporated, replaced by something cold and reptilian. He snatched the paper from my lap. We are not waiting, he said, his voice dropping an octave, devoid of any warmth. This needs to be done today. You are making this difficult. Mara, just like you always do. It was the first time he had shown his teeth. I looked at him, then at my daughter's shocked face. I didn't say a word. I just let the silence of the park and the recording device in my pocket capture the sound of a man losing control. The photos arrived on my phone at 6 p.m, illuminating the dark interior of my car with a sickly blue light. Omar had done his job. The images showed the neon sign of a motel on the outskirts of the city, a place where people went to disappear for an hour or two. But Evan was not there for romance. In the grainy zoom of the third photo, he was standing by the open door of room 104, handing a thick manila envelope to Brianna Sloan. Parked right next to Evan's luxury SUV was the grey sedan, the same sentinel that had been watching my comings and goings. They were not hiding an affair. They were coordinating a transition of power. My phone rang almost immediately after I swiped through the images. It was Lena. I got a look at the draft petition they uploaded to the electronic filing system, Lena said, her voice hard and fast. They kept it in the draft folder to avoid triggering a notification to you. But my paralegal found it. Mara, listed as the petitioner, is Kelsey. I closed my eyes. Kelsey would never file to declare me incompetent. She didn't. Lena replied. I zoomed in on the signature page. It is a digital copy-paste job. The resolution is different from the rest of the document. I ran a quick comparison with the closing documents from the apartment purchase 3 years ago. It is a perfect match, down to the ink smudge on the letter Y. They lifted her signature from the deed and slapped it onto a guardianship request. They are setting her up to be the face of this. So if you fight back, you have to fight your daughter. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They were using my daughter's trust as a weapon against me, and her signature as a shield for themselves. But there was another layer to unpeel. I looked at the photos of the grey sedan again. The billing to Northbridge Civic Analytics Bureau still nagged at me. I sat with the data, thinking back to the internship rosters from 5 years ago. Then it clicked. Trent Calder. Evan's brother had done a summer rotation in the IT infrastructure team at Northbridge. He had left with a recommendation letter and, apparently, a backdoor administrative login that had never been purged. He was logging into my old workplace's procurement system and generating expense approvals for external security audits, funneling the money to the private investigators. It was embezzlement, pure and simple, used to fund the destruction of a former employee. I called a former colleague, Sarah, who still worked in HR at Northbridge. I kept it casual, asking about old times, until she lowered her voice. It is weird you called. Mara, Sarah whispered. I saw a file update last week. Someone added a retro-dated memo to your personnel record. It claims you took early retirement due to observed cognitive lapses and erratic decision-making. The date on the memo is from 2 years ago, but the metadata shows it was created 3 days ago. I hung up, my hand shaking with a cold, controlled rage. They were rewriting history. They were planting evidence in my past to justify the theft of my future. If I went to court now, they would pull up this fabricated employment record and say, "Look, she was losing her mind years ago. I had enough. I did not want to wait for the doctor's appointment. I needed to blow the lid off the pressure cooker before they could seal it shut." I opened my messaging app and typed a text to Evan. I kept it deliberately vague, the kind of message that terrifies a guilty conscience. "I will be stopping by tonight around 8. I want to talk about the papers. I think I am finally ready to sign." I watched the reaction through the digital window of the video doorbell app, within 3 minutes of my text. Evan was pacing the living room. He was on the phone, gesturing wildly. I could not hear the audio, but I could read the panic in his body language. He was calling Brianna. He was calling Trent. He was trying to get the cast on stage for the final act. Then he called Kelsey. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. He wanted her there to manage me, to be the buffer. I checked my watch. It was 7:15. I called Omar and Lena. "Meet me at the building," I said. "Tonight is the night we break the door down." I started my car. I was not going there to sign a surrender. I was going there to burn their script to ashes. Lena Hartwell had spent the last hour firing off legal artillery. She had drafted cease and desist letters to Brianna Sloan and Redline Field Services, serving them electronically. More importantly, she had petitioned the family court for an emergency stay on any guardianship proceedings pending a fraud investigation. The clock was ticking, but we were moving faster than they expected. At 8 o'clock sharp, I stood outside my daughter's door. Beside me was Omar, his phone already recording, and Mr. Henderson, the night shift concierge I had insisted accompany us as a neutral observer. I used my key. The lock clicked, and we stepped into the hallway. Evan was standing by the kitchen island, a glass of scotch in his hand. He froze. He had told Kelsey he was in Washington for a conference until tomorrow. Mom Kelsey stood up from the sofa, looking between me and the strangers. "What is going on, Evan? I thought you were at the airport." Evan recovered quickly, though his knuckles were white around the glass. "Flight got cancelled. Kels. I came back to surprise you." "Mara, why did you bring guests? I am here to see the papers." "Evan?" I said. My voice steady. The medical power of attorney, the financial proxy, all of it. "We can do this privately," Evan said, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. He stepped toward me, trying to herd us out. "Show her the papers." "Evan?" Omar rumbled, stepping forward. His sighs filled the room. Kelsey looked terrified. She grabbed her laptop from the coffee table. "I don't understand." "Mom, you sent the draft over this morning." I saw it in the sync folder. "Open it," I commanded. Kelsey clicked the file. It was a petition for guardianship. See, it was created by user M. Whitlock, admin. She looked up at me, confused. "You started this. Mum, you sent it to my cloud." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They had used the compromised admin access not just to watch me, but to frame me. They had created the petition from my own hijacked digital identity to make it look like a lucid moment of a woman admitting she needed help. The room went dead silent. I did not scream. I did not defend myself. I looked Evan dead in the eye. "You do not just want my money," I said. My voice barely a whisper, but carrying to every corner of the room. "You want to turn me into a madwoman to steal the ownership of my words." Evan's phone buzzed on the counter. He snatched it up, turning his back to us. But in the quiet room, we heard every word. "Not now." He hissed into the receiver. Keep it tight. No leaks. He spun around and saw me looking right at him. He hung up immediately. The door opened behind us. Lena walked in, holding a sheaf of papers stamped with the court's seal. "Mr. Calder," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "This is a temporary restraining order, preventing you or any associates from filing guardianship petitions regarding Marjorie Whitlock. It also freezes the assets of Calder Meridian Holdings, pending a forensic audit." Evan looked at the order, then at Kelsey. He realized the legal wall had just slammed shut. So he did the only thing a narcissist has left. He attacked my reality. He rushed to Kelsey, gripping her shoulders. "Kelsey, look at her. Look at this circus. She is paranoid. She hired people to stalk us. This is exactly what the doctors warned about. Remember why she retired. She had a breakdown. Kelsey. She is inventing conspiracies to break up our marriage because she is lonely and sick." Kelsey looked at him, then at me. Her eyes were wide with the fear that he might be right. That was his dagger. He knew Kelsey's deepest fear was losing her mother to the same darkness that took her father. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to show the photos of the motel. But I stopped myself. If I played all my cards now, while Kelsey was emotional, he could spin it. I needed him to think he still had a chance to win. I needed him to walk into the final trap, willingly. "We are leaving," I said, turning to Lena and Omar. "Kelsey, you have a choice to make, but make it with your eyes open." I walked out, leaving my daughter in the silence of a room built on lies. I knew Evan would spend the night trying to cement his story. I was counting on it. Kelsey stayed in her old bedroom for 3 nights, but the silence between us was loud enough to rattle the windows. She was not sleeping. I could hear her pacing the floorboards at 2 a.m, trapped in a limbo of disbelief. She was angry at Evan for lying, but she was terrified that I was actually losing my mind and dragging her into a delusion. She looked at me with suspicion every time I couldn't find my reading glasses or hesitated on a word. Evan, meanwhile, launched a campaign of aggressive benevolence, a bouquet of white lilies funeral flowers. I noted arrived at my door with a card that read, "We are here for you, no matter how hard it gets." On social media, he posted a photo of himself and Kelsey from Happier Times, captioned, "Family is about patience, praying for healing and clarity during this difficult chapter." It was a masterclass in public gaslighting. He was painting a portrait of a saint dealing with a senile burden, and the likes were rolling in by the 100. Then came the letter from the Northbridge Civic Analytics Bureau. It was an invitation to an informal capability review regarding my tenure. It was a threat dressed up as bureaucratic procedure, intended to force me into a defensive crouch regarding my pension and reputation. But my network was faster. Sarah, my contact in HR, slipped me a digital log file over an encrypted app. "You were right," she had texted. The red line surveillance invoices weren't just approved by IT. They were countersigned by the new director of operations, Marcus Vance. I knew that name. Marcus Vance was on the client list Omar had pulled from Brianna Sloane's leaked files. He was one of the wealthy individuals she had consulted for estate restructuring 2 years ago. The circle was complete. Brianna had leveraged her client at my old job to fund the surveillance against me. It was a favor traded for a favor, paid for with taxpayer money. "We have enough," Lena said when I showed her the file. "Do you want to file the suit?" "No," I said, organizing the stack of papers on my dining table. "I want him to feel safe. Set up a mediation meeting at his lawyer's office." Lena looked at me, Her eyebrow arched. You want to walk into his turf. If he thinks he has the upper hand, he will talk. I replied. And I need him to say one specific thing. We arrived at the plush downtown offices of Evan's legal counsel at 10 in the morning. I carried a single leather briefcase. Inside was the dossier, the bank statements showing the transfers to Trent's shell company, the time-stamped camera logs, the photos of the motel exchange, Page's witness statement, and the smoking gun, the Northbridge invoice logs, linking Brianna to the surveillance car. But tucked in the back pocket was a document Evan did not know existed, a notarized affidavit from a forensic psychiatrist I had visited 2 days ago. It was a clean bill of mental health, comprehensive and unassailable, dated after their fake petition. Evan was sitting at the head of the mahogany table. He looked rested, confident, the picture of a magnanimous victor. Kelsey sat next to him, looking small and pale. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mara, Evan said, smoothing his tie. I'm glad you agreed to talk. We don't want a court battle. It's messy and expensive. I just want my daughter back, I said, keeping my voice trembling and low. I hunched my shoulders slightly. I am tired of fighting. Evan exchanged a look with his lawyer. He smelled blood. We have a proposal, Evan said, sliding a thin piece of paper across the table. I will withdraw the guardianship petition. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding our family finances, and you formally retract your accusations of fraud. We will allow you supervised visits with Kelsey twice a month, and I am willing to return 20% of the loan you gave us, as a gesture of goodwill. 20%. He was stealing 80% of my life savings and offering me the scraps as if it were charity. I looked at the paper. I picked up a pen, my hand shaking intentionally. And if I sign this? I whispered, looking up at him. Will you stop watching me? Will the cars go away? Evan leaned back, a smirk touching his lips. He thought he had broken me. Of course. Mara, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You just need to trust us. We handled everything to make sure you are safe. If you just let go, everything will be fine. I nodded slowly, capping the pen without signing. I suppose you're right, I said. I should just let the professionals handle the details. Exactly, Evan said. Why make it complicated? I looked at him, letting my mask slip just a fraction. So, the plan is finished, then? There are no loose ends. None. Evan replied, his ego taking the bait. It is a solid deal? Mara, take it. He didn't realize that by admitting the deal was solid and his control was absolute while sitting next to the woman whose signature he had forged. He had just walked onto the trapdoor. I had what I needed to pull the lever. The mediation room was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Evan leaned back in his leather chair, radiating the smug patience of a man who believes he has already won. He tapped the non-disclosure agreement with his index finger. It is a standard agreement. Mara, he said, his voice smooth. We just want to protect the family's privacy. You sign this, we drop the petition, and we all move on. You have been under a lot of stress. You are confused. Let us handle the burden. I looked at the document. Then I looked at him, letting a flicker of hesitation cross my face. I just want to understand one thing. Evan, I said softly. You kept saying everything had to be tight. You said it to Brianna in the hallway. You said it to Kelsey in the park. What does tight actually mean in your plan? Evan chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. He looked at his lawyer, then back at me, his eyes full of pitying contempt. It means airtight. Mara. A tight story, tight paperwork, tight control. It means a system that does not leak. He had said it. He had admitted that the narrative of my decline was a construct, a system to be managed. Thank you for clarifying, I said, my voice suddenly devoid of any tremor. Lena, please. Lena hit a key on her laptop. The projector on the credenza hummed to life, throwing a stark image onto the white screen behind Evan. It was the access log for my daughter's video doorbell. This shows an administrator account named Trent.C was added to the system last week, Lena stated, her voice crisp. Trent Calder, your brother. He used that access to monitor Mara's movements and, more importantly, to spoof her digital identity to create the guardianship petition. Evan stiffened. That is an error. Is this also an error? Omar spoke up, sliding a glossy photograph across the polished table. It showed Evan and Brianna Sloan outside the motel, the envelope changing hands. And this video, Omar added, tapping his tablet to play a clip. It was the footage of Evan handing over the cash, the grey sedan clearly visible in the background. And here is the sworn affidavit from Paige, your neighbour. Lena continued, stacking another document on the table. She confirms Brianna Sloan has been entering the apartment with you while Kelsey is working overnight shifts. Kelsey made a small, choked sound. She was staring at the photo of the woman she thought was a stranger. That's the woman from the hallway, Kelsey whispered. She is not just a woman. Mrs. Calder? Lena said gently. She is a disgraced estate planner, and she is being paid by the Northbridge Civic Analytics Bureau. The next slide hit the screen. It was the invoice log showing the payments to Redline Field Services, approved by Marcus Vance, Brianna's former client and my old agency's new director. We have already filed a formal complaint with the Inspector General regarding the misuse of public funds for private vendettas, Lena announced. This is no longer just a family dispute. Evan, it is a federal embezzlement investigation. Evan's face went grey. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is insane. You are listening to a senile old woman. She is making this up. Sit down, Omar said. He didn't shout, but the command was absolute. Brianna Sloan, who had been sitting silently in the corner as a consultant, grabbed her purse and made a move for the door. Omar stepped into her path, crossing his arms. I have already alerted building security. You can leave, Ms. Sloan, but the files stay. Evan turned desperately to Kelsey. Kelsey, baby, listen to me. Your mother is sick. She is trying to ruin us. You know her. She doesn't understand what she is doing. I understand perfectly. I cut him off. My voice was calm, authoritative, the voice of the investigator I had been for 30 years. I understand that when you whispered, "You are so tight," through that door, it wasn't about love. It wasn't even about sex. It was about control. It was about closing the noose. Lena slid one final paper toward Kelsey. This is the guardianship petition Evan filed. Look at your signature, Kelsey. Look closely. Kelsey took the paper. She pulled her own real estate contract from her bag, the one she had actually signed years ago. She compared them. The signature on the petition was pixelated, a digital artifact of a copy-paste job. It's identical, Kelsey said, her voice shaking. You stole my signature. You tried to make me sue my own mother. It was for us, Evan screamed. losing all composure. For our future, we needed the capital. Kelsey stood up. She looked at Evan, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw the fog clear from her eyes. She did not see a husband. She saw a parasite. "We are done," Kelsey said. I placed the settlement offer Lena had drafted on the table. "Here is the deal," I said. "You will repay the $75,000, plus interest. You will withdraw all petitions. You will confess to the fraud to clear my record at Northbridge. If you do this today, right now, I will not press criminal charges for the identity theft. If you walk out that door, I will ruin you." Evan looked around the room. He looked at his lawyer, who had closed his folder and was staring at the ceiling. He looked at Brianna, who was pale and shaking. He looked at Kelsey, who had moved to stand beside me. He realized there were no more corners to hide in. The story was tight, but he was on the wrong side of it. Kelsey picked up the pen. She didn't ask Evan for permission. She didn't look at him. She signed the countersuit and the affidavit supporting my sanity. She handed the pen to me. "Let's go." "Mum," she said, "I think we have some lasagna to heat up." We walked out of the room together, leaving Evan Calder sitting alone in the wreckage of his perfect, tight little plan. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Evan's downfall. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.